William Shakespeare, Richard III, a tyrant's ruthless climb to power and inevitable downfall. William Shakespeare's Richard III remains startlingly relevant in our age of political manipulation and authoritarian leaders. Written around 1593, this historical drama has become a timeless exploration of how charismatic demagogues rise to power and the inevitable consequences of unchecked tyranny. The play follows Richard, Duke of Gloucester, a physically deformed but intellectually brilliant nobleman who uses his wit, charm, and ruthless cunning to manipulate his way to the English throne. Set during the final phase of the Wars of the Roses, the drama chronicles Richard's systematic elimination of rivals, including his own brothers and the young princes in the Tower of London. Yet this isn't simply a story of political ambition. It's a psychological study of how personal insecurity and resentment can transform into monstrous evil. Through Richard's rise and inevitable fall, Shakespeare demonstrates that while evil may temporarily triumph through cunning and force, moral corruption ultimately contains the seeds of its own destruction. The play offers both a thrilling dramatic experience and crucial insights into the eternal struggle between power and justice. Chapter 1. The Villain's Opening Gambit. The opening scene of Richard III presents one of literature's most chilling villain introductions. Standing alone on stage, Richard of Gloucester delivers his famous soliloquy. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York. But this apparent celebration of peace quickly transforms into something sinister. Richard reveals his true nature, declaring that since he cannot prove a lover due to his physical deformity, he is determined to prove a villain. Richard's first target is his own brother, Clarence. With calculated precision, he exploits King Edward's superstitious fears about a prophecy involving the letter G. Richard manipulates the king into believing that George, Clarence's name, poses a threat, leading to Clarence's imprisonment in the Tower. When Clarence encounters Richard on his way to prison, Richard feigns sympathy and brotherhood, even promising to work for his release. Yet immediately after Clarence departs, Richard reveals his true intentions in a chilling aside. "Simple, plain Clarence, I do love thee so, that I will shortly send thy soul to heaven." Perhaps even more audacious is Richard's courtship of Lady Anne during the funeral procession of King Henry VI. Anne mourns both her father-in-law and her husband, both murdered by Richard himself. When Richard interrupts the funeral, Anne initially responds with appropriate horror, calling him a dreadful minister of hell and cursing him for his crimes. Yet, through a masterful display of manipulation, Richard gradually wears down her resistance. He claims her beauty drove him to murder, offers her his sword to kill him, and finally places his ring on her finger. The scene concludes with Richard's triumphant soliloquy, marveling at his own success. "Was ever woman in this humour wooed? Was ever woman in this humour won?" Chapter 2. Blood on the Crown. Soon after, King Edward dies. Richard is made Lord Protector of the young Prince Edward, the new king. With King Edward dead, Richard must eliminate the rightful heirs and manufacture a legal justification for his usurpation. His first move involves separating the young princes from their supporters by housing them in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their protection, but actually to control them completely. Richard's manipulation reaches new heights as he orchestrates a series of executions designed to clear his path to power. Lord Hastings, the Lord Chamberlain and loyal supporter of the young princes, becomes Richard's next target when he refuses to support the usurpation. During a council meeting, Richard suddenly accuses Hastings of treason, claiming witchcraft has withered his arm. "Off with his head. Now by St. Paul I swear I will not dine until I see the same," Richard declares, ordering Hastings' immediate execution. The theatrical performance that follows demonstrates Richard's mastery of political propaganda. he and his ally Buckingham stage an elaborate charade before the Mayor of London, appearing in rotten armour and claiming they've just discovered Hastings's treachery. Buckingham delivers a carefully crafted speech to the citizens, systematically undermining the legitimacy of Edward's children by questioning their birth and portraying Richard as the rightful heir through his resemblance to their father, the Duke of York. The culmination comes when Richard stages his own reluctant acceptance of the crown. In a masterful display of false modesty, he appears between two bishops feigning religious devotion, while Buckingham pleads with him to accept the throne for England's sake. This elaborate performance convinces the assembled nobles and citizens that Richard is reluctantly accepting a burden thrust upon him by popular demand. Once crowned, Richard immediately begins eliminating the remaining threats. He commissions James Tyrrell to murder the young princes in the Tower, receiving the news of their deaths with cold satisfaction. The innocent children, described by their killers as sleeping like 4 red roses on a stalk, represent the final obstacle to Richard's complete control of the throne. Chapter 3. The Kingdom Rises. The scene shifts to a kingdom in turmoil as news of rebellion spreads like wildfire. Richard, now isolated in his paranoia, receives a series of increasingly alarming reports from his messengers. Sir Edward Courtenay and the haughty prelate, Bishop of Exeter, his elder brother, with many more confederates are in arms, announces one messenger. Another follows with word that, in Kent, my liege, the Guilfords are in arms, and every hour more competitors flock to the rebels. The kingdom that Richard seized through manipulation and murder is now rising against him. At the centre of this growing rebellion stands Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, who represents hope for England's restoration. Richmond's supporters see him as the legitimate alternative to Richard's tyranny. As one of his followers declares, "Every man's conscience is 1,000 men to fight against this guilty homicide." The moral weight of Richard's crimes has turned public opinion decisively against him, transforming former subjects into active rebels. Richard's response to the mounting threats reveals his deteriorating mental state. When Lord Stanley brings news that Richmond has landed with a puissant navy, Richard's paranoia reaches new heights. He suspects Stanley of treachery, forcing him to leave his son George as a hostage to ensure loyalty. "Go then, and muster men, but leave behind your son George Stanley. Look your heart be firm, or else his head's assurance is but frail," Richard threatens. This desperate attempt to control his remaining allies through fear demonstrates how his reign has devolved into naked intimidation. The rebellion gains momentum as it becomes clear that Richard's support is crumbling from within. Even his closest advisors begin to waver. The Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's most trusted ally, ultimately joins the rebellion, though he pays for his defection with his life. As the opposing armies converge on Bosworth Field, it becomes clear that Richard faces not just a military challenge, but a moral reckoning that has united his enemies in righteous purpose. Chapter 4. Death of a Tyrant. The final act opens with 2 armies encamped near Bosworth Field, their contrasting moods reflecting the moral divide between tyranny and justice. Richard's camp buzzes with nervous energy as the king struggles with insomnia and growing paranoia. "I have not that alacrity of spirit nor cheer of mind that I was wont to have," Richard confesses, calling for wine to steady his nerves. Even the weather seems to conspire against him. "The sun will not be seen today," he observes ominously, interpreting natural signs as portents of doom. In stark contrast, Richmond's camp radiates confidence and moral purpose. Richmond addresses his followers with stirring rhetoric, casting their cause in terms of divine justice. "God and our good cause fight upon our side. The prayers of holy saints and wronged souls, like high-reared bulwarks, stand before our faces." He portrays Richard as a bloody tyrant and a homicide, whose defeat will bring peace to England. Richmond's speech emphasizes liberation rather than conquest, promising his soldiers that their victory will free their children from violence and restore order to the realm. The supernatural climax occurs during the night before battle, when the ghosts of Richard's victims appear to both leaders. Each spectre delivers a dual message, cursing Richard with despair and die, while blessing Richmond with promises of victory. This supernatural intervention transforms the coming battle into a cosmic judgment between good and evil. When Richard awakens from these nightmarish visions, his famous confidence finally cracks. "O coward conscience, how dost thou afflict me?" he cries, momentarily confronting the weight of his crimes. Yet he rallies for one final performance, addressing his troops with characteristic bravado, though his words ring hollow compared to Richmond's moral authority. The battle itself is swift and decisive. Richard fights desperately, crying his immortal line, a horse, my kingdom for a horse," as his forces crumble around him. When Richmond finally defeats Richard in single combat, the tyrant's death represents more than military victory. It symbolizes the restoration of natural order. Richmond's coronation as Henry VII and his promised marriage to Elizabeth of York will unite the White Rose and the Red, ending the Wars of the Roses and establishing the Tudor dynasty that would bring England into a new age of prosperity and stability. Analysis: the making of a monster. Richard's opening soliloquy reveals the psychological foundation of his villainy, a profound sense of physical inadequacy that transforms into destructive ambition. He describes himself as rudely stamped and want love's majesty, curtailed of this fair proportion, and cheated of feature by dissembling nature. Most tellingly, he declares himself deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up. This self-perception, as incomplete and rejected by nature, becomes the driving force behind his quest for power and recognition. Shakespeare creates a villain whose physical deformity serves as both explanation and symbol for his moral corruption. Richard's twisted spine mirrors his twisted soul, yet the playwright avoids simple determinism. Richard chooses evil not because he must, but because he believes it offers him the only path to significance in a world that values physical beauty and martial prowess. When he states, "Since I cannot prove a lover, I am determined to prove a villain," Richard's complexity emerges through his remarkable self-awareness and theatrical flair. Richard doesn't simply commit evil acts, he revels in his own cleverness and performance. After successfully wooing Lady Anne, he marvels at his achievement. "Upon my life," she finds, "although I cannot myself, to be a marvelous proper man." This moment of dark comedy reveals how Richard's villainy partly stems from a desperate need to prove his worth and desirability, even through the most twisted means. Richard's relationship with his own deformity evolves throughout the play, serving as both motivation and limitation. Early on, he uses others' discomfort with his appearance to his advantage, playing the victim to gain sympathy while plotting their destruction. Queen Margaret's curse calls him "thou elvish-marked, abortive, rooting hog," highlighting how his physical difference marks him as unnatural and monstrous. Yet Richard's intelligence and charisma prove that his deformity need not define him, making his choice of evil all the more chilling. Shakespeare's genius lies in creating a villain who is simultaneously repulsive and fascinating. Richard's wit, energy, and theatrical self-presentation make him compelling, even as his actions horrify. This complexity has made Richard III one of literature's most enduring antagonists, influencing countless subsequent portrayals of charismatic villains who use their outsider status to justify their crimes against society. Analysis: master of spin. Richard's most devastating weapon isn't his sword, but his silver tongue, and Shakespeare demonstrates how masterful rhetoric can reshape reality itself. The play reveals Richard as a consummate performer who understands that political power depends as much on perception as on force. When he interrupts Lady Anne's funeral procession, he doesn't rely on threats, but on carefully crafted emotional manipulation, transforming himself from murderer to suitor through sheer verbal dexterity. His success proves that skilled manipulation can overcome even the most obvious contradictions. The staged performance with Buckingham before the Mayor of London exemplifies Richard's propaganda techniques. The two conspirators appear in rotten armor, marvelous ill-favored, pretending to be under attack to justify Hastings' sudden execution. This theatrical deception convinces the mayor that Hastings was a dangerous traitor, demonstrating how carefully orchestrated performances can manufacture public consent for even the most outrageous acts. Buckingham's subsequent speech to the citizens reveals the sophisticated propaganda campaign behind Richard's rise to power. He systematically undermines the legitimacy of Edward's children by questioning their birth. Buckingham presents Richard as the rightful heir through your discipline in war, wisdom in peace, your bounty, virtue, fair humility, carefully constructing an image of the ideal ruler. When he calls for the crowd to cry, "God save Richard, England's royal king," the manufactured enthusiasm validates Richard's claim through apparent popular support. The play's most chilling insight concerns how easily public opinion can be manipulated through fear and spectacle. Richard understands that people want simple explanations for complex problems, so he provides convenient scapegoats. He blames Queen Elizabeth and her family for the kingdom's troubles, exploiting existing prejudices against the Woodville clan's rapid rise to power. His ability to present himself as the victim of others' machinations while orchestrating their destruction reveals the dangerous power of victimhood narratives in political discourse. Analysis, justice restored. Shakespeare's Richard III operates within a moral universe where divine justice ultimately prevails, though not without significant human suffering along the way. The play presents Richard's reign as a temporary disruption of natural order that must be corrected through both human action and supernatural intervention. The concept of divine retribution permeates the play through the fulfillment of Queen Margaret's elaborate curse upon the House of York. Margaret, the exiled queen of Henry VI, prophesies that Edward IV will die by surfeit, that Queen Elizabeth will outlive thy glory, like my wretched self, and that Richard will face the consequences of his crimes. As these predictions unfold with uncanny accuracy, the play suggests that human evil, however clever or powerful, cannot ultimately escape cosmic justice. The curses function as a form of delayed divine judgment, ensuring that moral debts will eventually be paid. The ghostly visitations before the Battle of Bosworth represent the play's most explicit supernatural intervention. The spirits of Richard's victims appear to both torment the tyrant and bless his opponent Richmond. Each ghost delivers the same dual message: despair and die, to Richard, while promising Richmond victory and divine favor. This supernatural chorus transforms the battle from a mere political conflict into a cosmic struggle between good and evil, with the dead themselves demanding justice for their murders. Richmond's victory represents more than military triumph. It symbolizes the restoration of legitimate rule and natural order. His final speech emphasizes healing and reconciliation. "We will unite the white rose and the red. Smile heaven upon this fair conjunction that long have frowned upon their enmity." The marriage between Richmond, from the House of Lancaster, and Elizabeth of York unites the warring houses, ending the cycle of revenge that has torn England apart. This union, blessed by divine providence, establishes the Tudor dynasty that would bring England into a golden age. The play's conclusion reflects both Tudor propaganda and genuine moral resolution. While Shakespeare certainly flatters his Tudor patrons by portraying Henry VII's victory as divinely ordained, the dramatic structure also satisfies deeper needs for justice and order. Richard's downfall demonstrates that tyranny contains the seeds of its own destruction. His crimes alienate supporters, create enemies, and ultimately unite the kingdom against him. The play suggests that while evil may temporarily triumph through cunning and force, the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, making Richard III both a political drama and a morality play about the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Richard III chronicles the rise and fall of one of history's most notorious tyrants. Richard of Gloucester uses cunning manipulation and brutal murder to seize the English crown, eliminating his brother Clarence and the young princes Edward and York. His reign of terror alienates former allies and sparks widespread rebellion led by Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond. The play culminates at the Battle of Bosworth Field, where Richard dies in combat and Richmond becomes Henry VII. Through Richmond's victory and marriage to Elizabeth of York, the Wars of the Roses end and the Tudor dynasty begins, restoring peace and legitimate rule to England after Richard's bloody usurpation.